So these are the bones. These are instruments that Dom and I were both playing, and they have a pretty long history. They're considered to be one of the oldest human instruments that there are in the world. They've been found in the ruins of Mesopotamia. They've been seen in 15th century Christian literature. They found them in ancient Egypt, and they were known as clappers. And they can still be found in parts of India, parts of Asia, Ireland, and that's how they actually came to America.
In America, the way that the bones became popular was in the mid-1800s. The blackface minstrel show featured the banjo, the fiddle, the bones, and the tambourine, and so the bones were a very prominent instrument. First, actually, with the dancers that started off in blackface in the 1830s, that became the first international phenomenon before the banjo came along. So they got into dancers and bones players, and then slowly and steadily they finally filled the band out.
And because a lot of blacks were spending a lot of time with Irish, it was even becoming part of African American music before minstrelsy. What do they call them? Street corner orchestras, or that's a term that comes up a lot. This pair that I have here, it was actually made out of ebony wood, like a piano. And this is what a lot of minstrels prefer to use, this sort of wood, which you can hear. That's sort of more of a hollow sort of sound, more clicky, crappy.
Here's the bone has, and so it has this little bit of a little more of a hollow sound, a little more of a bassier sound than the wood has. And so it's just all a matter about what materials you use for the bones, that, kind of your own preference, because the bones themselves are a real personal instrument. Each bones player plays it a little bit differently.
We both learned how to play from this guy named Michael Baytop, who I met at something called Common Ground Hill in Maryland. After that girl stole my money, I had to take that bus ride with this $20 in my pocket to eat out. Anyway, water under the bridge. But he's sort of a player who, he's a very minimalist player. He likes to play very close to his chest. Not swinging out, as you can see Dom play something.
Well,
more swinging out.
And when I started looking more into the blackface minstrel show, so I learned from Mike, and I learned a lot of small movements like this. And generally, you see a lot of bones playing like this. And when I started reading about the minstrel show, I started seeing these pictures of these guys with their arms hanging way out wide. So I started trying to just experiment with the space that you can reach, within all the different space that you can move in your body. And so there's a lot of just, instant experimentation that goes on with the bones, since they react to every single one of your movements.
Exactly. And since Michael Baytop, like the way he taught, I don't know how he taught you, but the way he taught all the people I was seeing him were just learn how to keep a beat, learn how to do triplets, and learn how to play this rhythm. And now you're a bones player, figure it out. And each one of the people who learned from him in the 1 week I was hanging out with him now play completely differently, That's Absolutely. The nature of the instrument.
And one of the things that Mike also recommended his mentor, Mr. Bones, told him to just play with any type of music. Usually the bones are associated with traditional music, Irish music or American folk music, but generally you can play the bones with anything. You could just have the radio on and play along with whatever song you feel like playing. And so that was something that Mike also had mentioned to me. So that was another way to really expand the idea of where to take the bones and how to use them.
And when you're learning how to play the bones, you need to play with the radio a lot, because people don't want you coming up behind them on a jam or during the show doing this sort of stuff. I got kicked out of a lot of jams the first month I was learning how to play the bones.
Because as Rihanna can tell you, because you're standing between the two of us, the bones are very loud.
Yes, they are.
Well, tell me a little bit about your instrument, Rihanna, since we were playing a couple of those special minstrel tunes.
This is a replica banjo from the minstrel era. This was made by Jim Hartle, based on a rubbing of a Joel Sweeney banjo, who was one of the first, shall we say, Caucasian Americans to pick up the banjo. He learned from black players, of course, because there were no other kinds of players of banjos when he started learning the banjo. The banjo was known as purely an African American instrument. It's hard to say whether he was the first, but he was definitely the first one that we know of, and would have been one of the first to really take the banjo out for a white audience. In addition to him, there was Dan Emmett and a lot of other people. Dan Emmett's the one who wrote Dixie. Yeah. That's a whole another story. But the banjo is very different from the modern banjo. It's got a goatskin head and wooden rim here and a fretless neck. And you see, it's a much more sort of beefy instrument down here in particular, but it's got a much lower sound. These would have been played with gut strings. The strings that I have are Nile guts, they're synthetic gut. And there's much more of a sort of a bounce with this kind of banjo. It's much more of a rhythmic kind of thing. There's things in minstrel playing that it's really hard to do on a modern banjo, modern wire string banjo. That kind of thing. It's just it's a really organic instrument. And the really important thing about this music is that a lot of those early minstrel banjo tunes were actually collected from black players. Mm-hmm. So it's really some of the earliest ethnomusicology we have. I mean, it's kind of in a weird place because those tunes were then used in blackface minstrelsy, which was clearly white people in blackface sort of portraying African Americans. But the important thing about minstrelsy is that it went on for a long period of time. It was the form of American entertainment that it went on for a long, long time. We're talking, 80 years. And also, there were different kinds of minstrelsy. The earlier minstrelsy wasn't as racist as the later minstrelsy once the slaves were freed. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more gray areas in it. There's different, there's troupe minstrelsy versus single minstrelsy. There's the tunes, and then there's some of the really horrible racist songs, and then there's just songs. So there's a lot of gray areas in the music, and I think it's really important to delve into it and to discover what is there and to say, okay, yeah, that's really horrible. Maybe we won't sing that song, but then maybe we'll play this tune, or maybe this song can be done, with a little change, or, it tells us a lot about what was going on in the country at the time. And the more we know about that, the better we understand what's going on.
And there were also black and white minstrels too. That's something that's generally not known. After the war, that became some of the first ways that black entertainers began to have opportunities to perform on popular stage, was going through blackface minstrelsy. So first there were the white guys that were doing it, then there were black minstrels that said, oh, well, we can be blacker than the white guys doing black, so then we're going to be blacker than that. So it became kind of an interesting interchange that happened even with that popular form of music. So with a lot of the bounce of these tunes, it gives a lot of fodder for bones players, and especially with hubby and I being able to play as two different bones players with our own particular styles, we can really overlap some different rhythms in there, and it's just beautiful. This is kind of really the birthplace of modern syncopation, where ragtime kind of emphasized a more sophisticated style of syncopation. This has you can tell it's the birth of syncopation, so it's a very visceral syncopation that stays right at the core of the music. So
yeah, some of the rhythms in these tunes are, way more complicated than the stuff that comes after, mm-hmm. But some of the tunes went on and became part of the American vernacular music, but a lot of them didn't. The only thing we have are that these people who sort of collected these tunes, and then then they started writing them, and it sort of became its own thing. But they wrote them down, and these banjo instructors, starting in like 1855, I think 1853, the gumbo chaff receptor, and then it just continues on for the next half a century of people wanting to learn how to play the banjo. And so some of these instructors are the only ties we really have to this music, and it's not perfect. I'd love to hear how a black person from 1815 played the banjo, but we don't have that. What we have is what we have, and we have to be okay with that.
Sure, it's the beginning of American music.
Absolutely.
It's the beginning of everything that we're hearing today and everything that came before and in between. So
it's important stuff.
We gotta love it.
We gotta
respect it.
Well, it's not hard to love it because the music's awesome. The words, they're problematic.
The words, it gets a little problematic.
It gets a little hairy. No, it's not just a little hairy. It's horrible. There's some horrible words, but music's beautiful.
But you can only,
you
can only blame a racist society.
Yeah, but what we do is we're performers of music, but you can pussyfoot around it a little bit, but it's really important to acknowledge that the stuff was horrible.
Absolutely,
it really was horrible. But that's not a reason to consign a whole 80-year stretch of music to the dustbin. It's that's part of our history.
And that's one thing that we try to do in interpreting this stuff, is try to present it with dignity and respect to the past as well as the people now, and also kind of show how we've progressed as a people. So it's like, you know, we don't want to just go back in time. So don't think that.
No.